Ladies and gentlemen, we are now ready to begin our session 2. Our session 2 is on a comprehensive housing policy for Singapore, and the presenter will be Dr. Liu Tai-ke. The respondent for the session will be Professor Chua Beng Huat, and the moderator will again be Professor Chan Heng Chee. May I invite both Dr. Liu as well as Professor Chua up on stage for this segment of the conference.
Our second session today is on a comprehensive housing policy for Singapore. And our speaker is Dr. Liu Tai-ke, who's chairman of the Centre for Liveable Cities. Dr. Liu is also a person who needs no introduction. The common name for him is Mr. Public Housing. During Dr. Liu Tai-ke's stint as the chief architect and head of the Housing Development Board, he built 500,000 units or 500,000 dwelling units. I don't know if you build them at 45 minutes per unit, but I think, Tai-ke, we've got to thank you for a very good job done. Dr. Liu is today in private practice, and he is also an advisor to about 30 major cities in China. He also works everywhere in the world, advising, taking up projects. The last time when I was with him in Bilbao, he was heading off to Moscow. So he does cover quite a wide wide geography. I have to say, given my additional hat now, I have to acknowledge that he was a very good chairman of the National Arts Council when he held that seat. So, ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Liu Tai-ke.
Good morning, distinguished guests, friends. As I was developing the content of my talk, I decided that I had to broaden the scope to talking about the transformation of Singapore, because we owe a lot to Mr. Lee Kuan Yew for what he had done. So let me just bear with me that there is a slight change in the contents. But on the other hand, I need to correct Heng Chee that at one stage, HDB produced one apartment every 8 minutes. Okay, let me begin. This is just a kind of self-advertisement because, okay, this is the kind of history of Singapore, Mr. Lee Kuan Yew, Prime Minister, and so on. And I was lucky to work mostly under him in HDB and URA. And so the content of my talk will be mainly between 69 and 92. But what is really rewarding to me has been that by working overseas, outside Singapore, and look back in Singapore, I really look back in amazement. What a wonderful structure that Mr. Lee and his first cabinet had put together to make things happen the way that we have witnessed. Okay, for some of you who have not heard of Centre for Liveable City, it is a knowledge center under MND and Ministry of MEWR. Key activities would be World City Summit and Lee Kuan Yew World City Awards and Mayor's Forum, and regularly conducting training programs. Okay, in summary, I think my feeling about the legacy from Mr. Lee Kuan Yew in terms of urban transformation, first thing, he had courage. As you heard from Peter earlier, had courage to go against the world opinion. And also, he gathered information. He was a studious urban planner, has been. But after knowing what to do, he took actions. he's developed a kind of delivery system, amazing delivery system. And also, he nurtured professional competency to deliver the ideas well. So this, in summary, is what I want to convey to you for the rest of the talk. Transformation of Singapore, you saw many slides from Peter. I just want to take you through a little bit more slides, just to remind all of us how big a journey we have gone through. So this is Chinatown, Orchard Road, the Squatters, New Bridge Road. This is, of course, GPO, now Fullerton Hotel. Today, Singapore, among many other things, we can boast of CBD, public housing, industrial estates, and so on. But also, don't forget, we have worked hard in creating very strong external links. Being a small place, if we did not have a strong external link, we would not be where we are today. So, just to show you Singapore today, okay, just a quick reminder of what our city is like today. Okay, so the transition in the last 48 years is fantastic, but I would like to add that Singapore became a modern metropolis by 1985. The rest of that is just further refinement. So in 25 years, we went through the transformation. But instead of just, besides modern development, we also did not forget to preserve history. Okay, just very quickly. And for a city with limited history, we have conserved 7,000 units of old buildings. And also we've done well with the protection of nature. Not perfect. I think nothing we've done is perfect, but basically very well, including the undersea world. How did we manage to have this kind of undersea world? Because of very stringent pollution control. So I think just a short summary. Transformation have been possible only with strong support of a concept plan from Mr. Lee and his first cabinet, because you need a good concept plan to serve as an agenda for urban redevelopment and urban development. What have been the tangible benefits of this transformation, besides the pictorial changes? Overall effect, and also the kind of how were the changes orchestrated? It did not happen by accident or by chance. Economically, today I'm talking mainly about physical changes, but let's not forget we have made huge economic changes. At 52,000 per capita today, we have actually our per capita income is above USA, which is something I find it hard to believe. And it's the largest forest center in Asia. Despite all the complaints of authoritarian society, government, we have the best civil justice country. But environmentally, I would like to say that through very careful planning and strategizing, although in 1960 our density was 3,000 person per square kilometer, now it's 7,500, more than double. It will be 9,000, maybe by 2030, but I'm sure it will go way beyond that. Now, it is important for us to know that despite our density having been doubled, because of careful planning, careful support from the cabinet, we managed to improve the environment with higher density. And we must have confidence that this can go on. And so how do I prove to you that we can have higher density and improved environment? So the vertical axis is density, horizontal axis is livability. Singapore is at the top right corner. And also, Siemens ranks Singapore as the greenest city in Asia. But let's see what have been the orchestrated changes. What did Mr. Lee and his cabinet orchestrated the changes? Okay, so we would like, this is sometimes I had the chance of hearing the words directly from him. The immediate thing is to remove the third world stigma, flood, pollution, and of course, want to clean the waters and also remove the dirty streets. Okay, because this could be achieved, should be achieved, and could be achieved relatively quickly. And also moving towards the environment of the first world. In fact, I didn't have a chance to show you. We used to have lots of brown fields, lots of scars on the hills and the streets, roadsides. But now it becomes green, and also our street noise has become lower. In fact, let's not take it for granted that Singapore is probably the least noisy cities in Asia, and you go elsewhere, you actually feel uncomfortable with the high noise. And also, we lay the foundation towards a functioning city. It's very important because I asked many foreign friends from overseas, said, why do you come to Singapore to work? Almost without hesitation, they said, everything works here. And that was not done by accident, it was done consciously. So we build up reliable infrastructures, and we ensure traffic flows. Okay, introduce ERP and just various measures, and upgrade external linkages. Because the city must function well before we can invite people from overseas to come and support us. But we also nurture social environment. You heard a lot of that from Peter, but in my own words, these 4 statements I'm going to show you is an achievement that few other cities in the world can boast about. No homeless. 82% people live in HDB flats. And what is amazing is 93% of Singaporeans are homeowners, with 95% satisfaction of HDB flat. No squatters. By 1985, they were all gone. No ethnic enclaves. There is a kind of ethnic quota system. I was asked at that time in HDB to make the announcement of the quota system. I expected a huge attack on me. That's in the early 80s. I'm still waiting for a huge attack. Not a single letter appeared in the newspaper because, and I want to add that up to a point, if you do something reasonably, Singaporeans are rational people. And also no poverty ghettos. These 4 statements, very few other cities can boast of. Now, attention to detail is also very important. As we drive and walk in the street, we take these factors for granted. Just think of other Asian cities or other cities. We don't have random parking. We don't have hawkers all over the footpaths. We don't have dirty buildings because all the buildings must be repainted periodically. according to certain guidelines. No broken footpaths because there was a footpath upgrading committee just to settle these issues. No wild advertisement, there are clear guidelines. And no litters. Now, how many cities in Asia can boast of this? We go through our streets every day, but do we realize that the environment that you're enjoying did not happen by accident? So I'd like to say that I think the lessons we learned from Mr. Lee and his cabinet is that we must do what we need to do and not be swayed by world opinions. Until 1985, we were criticized for being a clinical cities, but now we have been credited being the second best city with the second best nightlife. Well, it's not my words. This is in the newspaper. So while we work hard, we also create a very good environment for everybody. So, but we also do not just do the necessary things to improve the quality of life, the functionality of city. We also pay attention to visual environment. Heritage, you saw earlier, we protected a lot of buildings. Rivers, reasonably well protected. There have been a few mishaps here and there, but I would say by and large, we have good rivers, and especially now with the ABC water program, all our rivers get a new lease of life. And neatness in the urban scape. So, and that did not happen by accident. There were regulations to insist on walkability in our streets and neatness. And neatness is not a bad thing. In fact, I often tell my friends in China, I said, the first city in China that appears neat is a unique city. And Singapore is a unique city in that sense. And also, very few grotesque buildings, because you see that all over in other cities. We don't have that, because we don't believe in instant thrill. We believe in durable beauty. Okay. And also, let's look at the user-friendliness of our city. Okay. That means even earlier on you saw that we plant flowers on the pedestrian bridges, on the flyovers. Well, beauty is not confined to architecture. It's many other things that you see in a city. We pay attention to that. We pay attention to walkability and also legibility of a city. Many friends tell me that wherever he is in the city, he knows exactly where he is. He will not feel disoriented. Now, these things did not happen by accident. It was carefully calculated. And also ensure quality of the space you are in the city. Safe, clean, hygienic, and also quiet. Now, all these things we are enjoying in Singapore without being conscious that they are serving us well. And I must say that, yes, I think my colleagues in HDB and URA would share some credit for having delivered the ideas from Mr. Lee, but on the other hand, ideas did first come from Mr. Lee so that we could deliver this kind of environment. Glamour. We want to create good city instead of iconic architecture, and we have been innovating without falling for novelty. These are our sense of priority, and it's a sense of priority set by Mr. Lee and his first cabinet. Now, these have been the changes. What have been the agents of change? Because you see the transformation, but it did not happen easily. Okay, so I'm giving you this agents of change. So administration is very important. Master plan is important. And also special measure for our tiny city. you saw this earlier. This was, although it looks very sketchy, it was a concept plan with very, very good ideas inside. In fact, in URA or in HDB, I've been following studiously on this plan because it works very, very well for us. And based on that, in 1991, I prepared this concept plan while I was in URA. And it is now updated, but the principle is still similar to the 1971 concept plan. In other words, continuity of the plan, with continuous refinement of a plan is our characteristic. We do not do what many other cities do, is with every new administration, we throw away the old plan and start a new one. Now, and also Mr. Lee and his cabinet designed a good administrative system. Okay, now this is something that even I have been taking for granted for many, many years. Until recently, I realized that we're very unique in anywhere in the world that our master plan and our planning regulations have teeth to implement. Many other cities, even some of our, even in Hong Kong, they don't have this kind of authority that we have taken for granted in Singapore. That's how we could manage to hold the city together in one big, efficient system. And I would like to emphasize that while it's important for the cabinet, Mr. Lee and his first cabinet, to give good ideas, strong ideas, to deliver with quality, a strong professional team is important. And Mr. Lee and his cabinet did build up a very strong professional team. And this is something that we should not take for granted. But we also have special legislations to make things work for us. For example, that means the acts and also creating acts and corresponding agencies for every perceived need. To curb speculation is important. In fact, there have been many legislation to this effect. Otherwise, with a tiny city that we have, the land prices would have gone even higher. And we have this so-called development charges. That means the land value that you enjoy on your piece of land is given to you. It's not your birthright. And therefore, a whole lot of administration follows that. And careful management of land usage. We don't waste land. And also our ability in the early days to assemble 70% of the total land in Singapore as state land, because that would enable us, the government, to do all the necessary things without having to go through the process of land acquisition and so on, and delay all the important projects. And protect landed properties. Mr. Lee actually worried that with all the bigger countries around us, with lots and lots of much richer people in Singapore around us, they could have come here and buy up all the landed properties and leaving nothing for Singaporeans in the future. So all these little details, little concern for the welfare of Singaporeans were thought through. And of course, there was a lot spoken about HDB, but actually one of the key factors for the HDB success story is resettlement policies. And then ingenious regulation, okay, market sensitivity. I think I'm going to run out of time, so I'm going to go through faster. So good ideas needs the support of effective and efficient administration, and we are very lucky that we have that. The nature of, I think the administrative culture is also important. The government, the cabinet respect all sound ideas and clear sense of priority, never rush for iconic buildings. And another thing is anticipated problems, very often before they surface or even appear in the press. And clear division of roles, so the responsibility and authorities are clearly placed, so each agency can do its own work effectively. Clear thinking, like high-density public housing was condemned in the early days, that we were building slums for the future. Well, we soldiered on, solve all the problem of high-rise buildings. So this is also management style. We're in a hurry, but we don't rush unnecessarily. We give attention to critical details. I'm going to rush a little bit. And despite the appearance of an authoritarian government, we kept our ears on the ground. The government kept the ears on the ground. Otherwise, how would you know the need of the society? But in retrospect, I think probably the government did its job too well. We really need to spend a bit of time explaining to the people, involving the people of what the government has been doing. So I think administrative culture is very important for a good city to happen. And the courage to push the boundaries beyond the conventional wisdom is also very important. So some special measures, okay, for the smallness of our city, we need to have certain special controls. So people tend to say that we control too much. But in a small place like this, we needed to have some special controls. And we need to have public housing to solve the housing problem. And also, in fact, in HDB, I was kind of running a successful brick factory, granite quarries, and one day the cabinet said, close them all. It hurt me, but I understood the reason. So small may be beautiful. People say it's easier to run Singapore. Not totally true, because our resources are also limited. So we need a lot of courage, a lot of knowledge, and ingenuity to do our own things. Now, this thing, since I'm running out of time, I'm going to let you go through this very quickly. And that is, if in retrospect, Singapore has been an urban laboratory. We look at all the key ingredients to make the city work, and you can see that they have nothing to do with iconic buildings. They're all solid, functional stuff. And the only thing, if I may just be a little bit greedy, is to say that with all the achievement we've made, maybe we could spend a little bit more time looking at cultural issues, art communities. And of course, there's a clear need to nurture the love of citizens to our city and country. This is probably the next challenge in the coming future. The fact that we can achieve so much is because there was a very clear division of labor. That means the green area is the government, the black area is the people, very clear division. The government has to take care of the macro issues because it has a macro data, it's got a macro responsibility. So I feel that what has happened in Singapore is that we created a kind of perfect stage for the people to act out their life's drama. Okay, just give me a few more minutes. The urban process did not happen overnight, but over the years, we developed this process. Planning, infrastructure immediately following that, promotion, okay. And then, but I often tell people that public housing is the open secret weapon of Singapore's successful urbanization, because it's open because everybody can see. It's secret because nobody knows how it works and how it contributed to the successful urbanization of Singapore. So with public housing, it enabled us to clear squatters and, of course, build public housing, but also to create land for industry, for infrastructure, for CBD, and so on. So this urban process is, I would say, is very unique in the world and certainly in Asia. Okay. And in doing the planning, we also had to have clear vision, and in other words, there is a professional side of work in the kind of yellow colors, but the professionals can't do its work well unless the government sets sound goals, design ways for converting ideas into concept plan, or introduce given the high authority to the master plan, give its power, and also create various acts for implementation. So all these things are part of the design of the urbanization of Singapore. So I will skip this one. I just want to say that in making a good plan, we had all these three things. Despite the criticism from many people, we do have heart. Okay. We do have a scientific brain, and we do have artistic. Now, I'm going to come to the conclusion, and that is, looking back in Singapore, the light blue is a sky, the dark blue is the ocean. A lot of work was done unseen. The political leadership, the fear for our inability to survive, that drove us to create the physical environment and create the social environment. We've done relatively well, and therefore now we have a kind of energized citizenship, attracting a lot of foreign talents. And on the surface, we see prosperous economy, good environment, sustainable ecology. And I would like to emphasize that we are enjoying a very high level of prestige, which few other Asian cities enjoy. Now, inspiration for Mr. Lee, I think he has been an idealist. But while he's idealistic, he's also pragmatic. It's a very rare combination. It's an economic animal, calculated everything, but there's nothing wrong with it. It's a virtue. And he thought through everything clearly and have the courage to implement them. But in the process, I'm using the word from Dr. Goh Keng Swee. Dr. Goh Keng Swee said that Mr. Lee spent all his life persuading people. That's how he got the kind of unpopular ideas going. So to carry on, I feel that we need to understand and value the legacy from Mr. Lee. Okay, and while we're moving forward, remember to keep the strong points that we have accumulated. And also remember that we should give priority to innovation and not to novelties. And I think if there's any one simple statement I want to leave behind, is that the Singapore story is a story of clarity equal courage. Thank you.
I am now going to call on the respondent, who is Professor Chua Beng Huat, the Provost Chair Professor of the Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences in the National University of Singapore. Professor Chua was my colleague before. He's known for his independent streak, and he's a contrarian. But he's worked before, you know, in the research planning office of the Housing and Development Board. So, Dr. Chua, Professor Chua, your floor.
Thank you. I was just whispering to Tiger to say, he's left me nothing to say. So he said, I just have to say I have nothing to say. If only it were that simple, then I would have been okay. As Hengji has said, I used to work in the housing board. In fact, I was in Canada before I came back to the housing board. I was home for one of these filial piety visits. I was visiting my family. And then I saw this ad in the Straits Times saying that the HDB was looking for a sociologist. So I went to see Tiger, and so he's the man who's responsible for my being in Singapore after I was away for about 15 years. I'm not sure he'll not live to regret having been responsible for that. But then when I saw him, and he had said, ask him, and why do you need a sociologist, and what do you want a sociologist to do? And he says, I don't know what a sociologist would do, but I know I need one. Which was a very interesting answer, because it obviously that he knew that he was building housing for the whole nation, and that it wasn't just a physical structure that was being built, but that the HDB had to start to worry about the everyday life of Singaporeans, because the physical environment was going to determine their life in a very serious way. And so in some sense, he knew that he needed to worry about that, even though he didn't know where to begin worrying about it. And then when I came, we started to build up a fairly large Department of Social Research. Did quite a lot of work, to which I'm really indebted, because part of my academic career after that has been thinking about housing policy. So that's a testament to the idea that the HDB has heart and has always worried about people's everyday life. And the comprehensive planning of the housing estate have very much that in mind. Some of the interesting things, of course, as mentioned, one of the most interesting things is to actually mix in all the different housing types so that there is no ghettoing effects. Because as we know, in most instances, public housing tends to be the concentration of multiply social disadvantaged population, and over a very short period of time, brand new housing becomes unlivable. So that the mixing in of the middle class and the poor was very important, because socially, to a certain extent, it homogenizes the everyday life of all Singaporeans, since 90% of them live in HDB housing estate. And I think this is very important sociological consequences, because in a way, the inequalities of society in Singapore is actually not very visible. So unless you have a trained eye, or unless you have worked with the HDB, when you walk around a housing estate, you really can't tell who is living in one-room flats and who is really living in three-room flats. I think it has become more and more, over the years, become more and more differentiated. But in the early years, up to about at least late 1980s, it was very difficult for people untrained to know who is poor and who is rich by just looking at the blocks of building. And this homogenizing effect, I think, is fairly important because it reduced the visibility of inequalities. However, I wouldn't be myself if I don't have some complaints. One of the interesting things about this sort of homogenizing daily life, because in a way, everyone in the public housing estate is equally served by the public transportation, by the light industry available, by the wet market. So, but the unfortunate thing, of course, is that because inequalities have become invisible, there also became progressively a neglect of the idea of poverty. And so I think now it's only in the last few years that because income inequalities have become so pronounced, that the question of poverty has become a public issue. And it has, because of in my judgment, because we did too good a job in covering it up, that it has taken so long for it to become obvious. Another interesting point, and I think this is really important, is that the nationalization of land is really crucial to the entire development of this island. Now, the nationalization of land, principally, partly because of inheritance from the British colonial government, but also largely through the Land Acquisition Act, to which, in this very early phase, Professor Tommy Koh has written against it. But the nationalization of land was absolutely crucial because it allows the kind of, not only the comprehensive planning, but the long-term sustained working out of the concept plan. Because without which, with land speculation and other kinds of property rights, it would be impossible to carry out the planning so consistently and with such efficiency and speed. This, of course, is important because most people from the outside will look at Singapore as a very sort of advanced capitalist nation. But in a way, the nationalization of land is a socialist principle. It is one of the elements of the early history of the PAP as a social democratic political party that we still have. And in fact, the public housing policies follows from that sense of social responsibility that comes from social democracy. So I think that one of the underlying features that should be emphasized to the rest of the world that are looking at us in terms of our urban success is to drive home this idea of land nationalization. I remember after the transition of East European socialist countries into capitalist nations, into market nations, having arguments with housing sociologists from Eastern Europe who, having been so fed up with the communist state, was rushing to privatize land again as private property. And I had tried to convince them that that would have been a mistake. But of course, their experience with the communist state was so bad that they wouldn't hear about state ownership of anything after that. So, but I think that is a serious, that is a very important lesson for developing countries. If there were any legal possibility at all, is to nationalize land. However, one of the political consequences of nationalization of land is that the state now controls all public spaces. Now, the consequence for civil society activities is dire, because you cannot hold any activities in Singapore in public without the permission of the state, which of course impose huge constraints on what you can do. And I think that's one of the hidden costs of the development of our political space and social spaces in Singapore. The only instance I have heard of in which the use of public space required no permission came from a group of teenage girls. This group of teenage girls were the fans of a famous K-pop group. One of the leader of the K-pop group was unjustly kicked out of his band, and in protest of this band, there was international organization. You have to know I spent a lot of time watching K-pop. Because of that, there was an international boycott against the entertainment company. But one of the group of about 40 Singaporean teenage girls decided to do their own protest. So they had drawn up placards and all that, and they wanted to demonstrate, to publicize their support. They went to the police and asked for permission to march down Orchard Road. And the police said that since that's not a political demonstration, they didn't need a permit. So 40 of them got together, started on Tanglin, the top end of Orchard Road, marched down to Ngee City, playing music all the way along, carrying placards in support of their pop star, and then ended up doing a sort of dance performance at Ngee City and videotaped themselves, uploaded it on YouTube. So that's the only instance I know where public use of space didn't require permission. So if you want to do anything in public, make sure it's not political, or at least in the eyes of the police. So I have one final point to make, or two, if I have the time. One of the interesting things about the efficiency of both public housing and of the urban planning in general is, of course, a planning authority that is highly insulated from public pressure because it has all the authority of the government in its backing itself. The political processes also doesn't have public consultations, and the professionals could do their work in isolation of public pressure. As Tiger has mentioned, the ethnic enclave policy in most multiracial societies, in places where race is a much more politicized element in society, would have been seriously difficult to carry out because there are certain downsides, certain negative consequences to be paid. But because policy practices can be so insulated from political processes that it could carry out its work very well and very speedily. But going forward, I don't think that kind of insulation is available anymore, even though it will still not be town hall type of pressure. But I'm sure, as we know in the last while, all the planning processes are now much more subjected to different civil society pressures, and also the electoral process itself. So I think that whether the government likes it or not, it does now have to listen a lot more than it used to. So the kind of happy insulation for the planning authorities is something of the past. Finally, the one point that needs to be, that is interesting, and I think we are, as Singaporean, should really be proud of the city as we have it. And this is fairly clear internationally, although it's seldom known, but that Singapore has become a model of urban planning. Singapore has become a model of urban planning from sheer mimicry to the disassembling to the borrowing and through our elements of our planning process, and through the fact that a lot of our architects and planners are getting work in the world doing urban planning, translating the knowledge that we have acquired into different locations. So sometimes, don't be surprised when you're traveling the world, you sometimes think that you are back in Singapore because the very housing estate you're in feels like an HDB housing estate because you have been carried there. I'll give you some examples of this. In Surabaya, there is a new housing estate developed by a private developer that copied Singapore so much that they actually reproduced the statue of Raffles. The only thing is they could not use Raffles, so they replaced Raffles' head with Beethoven. So that's this is kind of mimicry that is interesting. Another interesting instance, closer to really our own history, is that there is a emergency, what we now would have called emergency housing, rental housing estate in Brazil that is actually called Singapura. So, I mean, that's closer to our own history. Perhaps it's built into naming that squatter estate Singapura with the ambition of looking forward and learning from us. But again, one of the really difficult things is that Singapore has to be taken in its totality, in its own history. The developments, a lot of the lessons we develop in a lot of these developments is in fact what we do in the contingents of history. And slowly it has become systematically developed. Now we have a set of principles and plans. The problem is that once our knowledge and lessons travel overseas, they get disassembled, they get only pieces and parts of it gets borrowed and then repackaged in another location. So the problem then becomes you have the physical reproduction of it, but the very political and social motivations behind it is missing. So what, as in Singapore, a very interesting and important social redistributive practice of public housing has become gated communities in enclaves of middle classes in Vietnam, in China, and all these places. So as you can see, even as we're being modeled, there are actually quite difficult, it is not possible to clone Singapore. So one of the things is that as we are providing more and more technical assistance to other developing countries, we need to keep this in mind, that it is really not possible to clone ourselves everywhere, and that the political, social motivations behind our own practices are often missing and doesn't produce the kind of egalitarian results of our public housing estate. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Beng Wat. I think those comments were very interesting, very good, and has put a different point of view. On your point about the insulation and lack of participation, I think you're right, Beng Wat, in saying that what was the situation a few decades ago is going to change. It changes because civil society is now sort of becoming more active. And Peter Ho, in his presentation, has in fact pointed out that, yes, this will be negotiated going forward. And the balance you find is what is going to be interesting in Singapore. Now, we come to question time. You've heard a lot. Plenty has been put on the table. And, sorry. We have two women who would like to ask questions, Gaimin and Aileen Wong. Gaimin first, yeah? Oh, sorry.
Oh,
all right.
thank you. I'm happy to defer to Aileen.
Question, yeah? Can we be brisk and keep our questions short so that I can have more speakers?
Yes, I will. Well, since both speakers have spoken on a broader field than just public housing, I take the liberty to do so with my question as well, which is directed at Dr. Liu, whose wise words I always respect. Dr. Liu, you mentioned that in retrospect, Singapore's planning was a living laboratory. And we all know that experiments in laboratories sometimes go wrong. We learn from our mistakes as well as our successes. So can I just ask you, wearing not just your public housing hat, but your master planning hat, what, in retrospect, would you have done differently if you were a master planner now? Thank you.
Good question, Gaimin.
I would say that the fact that we put ourselves in the urban laboratory means that we discover all the mistakes before we implement our plans. So there were very few mistakes, if I may be allowed to say so. So in retrospect, perhaps in HDB housing, I wished that I had, or the government had, or even I had thought earlier to introduce private housing into HDB new towns. And that would have been even better. At the moment, you know that we do have private housing in HDB new towns. And when we first introduced that, it was partly to remove the stigma of HDB living, but at the same time is to enrich the social community in the new towns. And when we first did the land sale, I was totally nervous because the stigma of HDB new town then was so strong. I wasn't sure that anybody would want to bid for a piece of land in HDB new town. But the first response was overwhelmingly good. So I asked my staff, said, why did they respond so well? They said, simple. You have got all the facilities in the new town. People want to come and enjoy HDB facilities. So I think this is probably one thing that I wish we had done earlier.
Thank you, Tiger. Aileen.
Thank you. I would not take too much time. I think, unless I heard Beng Wat wrongly in his opening statements, I cannot agree with him in saying that HDB actually covered up poverty and therefore caused the whole thing to blow in our face. We do not just whitewash the walls of the rental blocks. we do not just sweep these things under the carpet. In fact, we know income inequality has been growing. Now, but of course, there are many different reasons for why the income gap has grown so much more in recent years in Singapore. I'm not going to go into that. My question is for Taika and the urban planners in the room. Now, I appreciate the fact that the planners look at things in a very systematic manner and that they derive tremendous satisfaction in implementing Singapore's concept plan until its total fruition. The question is, what next? But the challenge is actually with ICT technology nowadays. How does it challenge the urban planners' principles of hierarchy, of the spaces, of planning for regional centers and so on? How does technology impact the way the urban planners think? Because the way people study, the way people live and work has become quite different. May I have some answers?
Well, I will not give you a direct answer, but an indirect answer, okay? About 30 years ago, the Harvard Review came to see me and asked me what would be the future of shopping centers. With modern technology, you can buy anything online. I said there will be shopping centers because shopping centers are not places to shop, but places to meet people and friends. And 10 years later, there was another article saying that, yes, shopping center would have a life in the future. In other words, we look at the urban life not only in terms of technology. There are other dimensions that we need to look at. And also, I'm the designer and planner for the INSEAD Institute in Singapore. And when we did the phase 1, the INSEAD said, well, keep the library small. In the future, there will be no library because of the technology. I said, are you sure? Sure, just keep it small. So they're the client, and they are the management guru, so I did that. And then in phase 2, they said, we want a larger library. I said, wait a minute. You told me that in the future there'll be no libraries. I said, oh no, we realize that that's the purpose of library. So in other words, every facilities, there's a human dimension to it. There's a lifestyle dimension to it. And technology cannot replace everything. I want to take the opportunity to respond to one of the points that Beng Huat mentioned, 2 points. We have, at the moment, around 70% of land owned by the state land. And I would like to highlight that the government basically tried to hold the line at 70%, at least around the time I was still in the government. The reason is that we wanted to have a substantial percentage of land in private hands to make sure we know the market value of land and market value of property. So you can see that every decision we make, the government makes, I can't say we, I'm out of government, every decision the government makes is carefully considered. Despite the huge involvement of government in the development of a city, there is a healthy respect for private market transaction. The second thing I want to mention is that my personal wish is, and this is very unpopular, but I want to say so, my personal wish is that Singapore government and the URA master plan will continue to hold a high authority. But it is not just high legal authority, but high moral authority. When I was in HDB, in fact, it was fortunate that we had this so-called estate management department. I actually talked to my staff every week on the needs on the ground. And of course, I spoke regularly with people like Beng Huat about the needs from a sociological point of view. So despite the fact that it appears to be top-down, there's a lot of, that we kept our ears on the ground. And in URA, I'm sure it's still being practiced, is that every time there's a change in the plan, we will consult the business community, professional communities, get their feedbacks. And after that, after amendment, we will exhibit the change plans and invite citizens to write their comments in, not to comment verbally, but to write in so that we could, the URA could then kind of take note of the needs of a society. So if we can continue to maintain a high moral authority by producing very good work, listening to the needs of the ground, I wish that we'll continue to have the master plan that can coordinate the development of Singapore together in a systematic way.
Thank you very much. I know there was a hand, a couple of hands here. 3 hands. Wow. Kim Wong, what am I doing for time? We are over time. Oh dear. You're going to have lunch late. Okay. I have here, very quickly, can we keep the questions short, answers short? John Powers, who's just joined me, he arrived yesterday from the United States. He gets the first bite. Ho Kong Chong, and is that you, Andres, at the back from SUTD? Okay, fine. Very quickly, please.
Hello. I have just a simple question. There is no doubt that the Singapore experience has much to inform other developing countries, countries that are still struggling with economic development. The one thing that I haven't seemed to have heard, and I am not, clearly not as informed on the history of Singapore as many in this room, but is the question of, it sounds as if there has almost been an absence of a resource constraint. So it would be wonderful to hear about the experience in terms of bureaucratic fiscal empowerment that has enabled, and we've heard a lot about the vision and some of the planning tools and the laws, but to hear a little bit about the sort of the bureaucratic fiscal and the public sector economic side, particularly as it relates to public housing, I think would be very helpful, for at least for me. Thank you.
Let's hear the questions. We want to hear all the questions first and let, Kong Chong from NUS.
So the question I have for Taika is the question of participation. So is the HDB so efficient that residents have no room for participation? Because all they do is complain, and the estates management will take care of it. So we end up seeing a society that has a strong state intervention and its efficiencies, but a very weak residential participation environment. Thank you.
Thank you, Kong Chong. And Andres, the last question. Andres Sefso.
Hi. I wanted to just build upon those points about equality and satisfaction in Singapore and point out an early typology that was very common in HDB building, where very dense housing and commercial blocks were introduced in the downtown settings, like all the centers we know, the Chinatowns, the Waterloos, the Rochors, and their impact on actually catering to equality, having middle class and sometimes lower class citizens sort of share the resources of a downtown district, which is one of the very powerful ways of distributing resources, and have a commentary about what has happened to that today. When we look at the Marina Bay master plan and some of the other areas, what about HDB, both commercial and residential affordable space in the best locations of Singapore?
Expensive land no longer being used for public housing.
Okay, I'll try to, in terms of financial resources, recently I had a good fortune to ask Mr. Pillay, who just left, to say, I said, well, how did we get the money to get ourselves started? He said, well, we continue to have tax income, even in 1960, because the MNCs, the foreign investments continue to here. We'll continue to have an efficient tax collection system. So there was money coming into the government's hands. And that gave us a good start. In many other countries, when they became independent, they kick out the old masters. We did not do that. It was a very wise move. And of course, after that, we, as you mentioned, you heard what I said earlier, Mr. Lee and his first cabinet were very economically sensitive. So for every investment, we want to get a return. And also we didn't want to waste anything. Every building, for example, in HDB, we have now built over 1 million units of apartments, but I mentally estimate we only have had to demolish less than 10,000 units. The percentage, it's in most other cities, they would have demolished several 100,000 units. So this is how we manage our finance. The second issue about equality of participation, I would like to say that by HDB, if we talk about HDB, keeping our grounds close to the ground, our ears close to the ground, by having the grassroots organization feeding information to HDB officers, by our officers going around. This is in the old days when we still had a Estates Department to actually observe and find out needs, and also by having a small army of sociologists conducting surveys. I don't think I apologize for saying that we actually solve the problems before they appear in the newspaper. And therefore, that kind of seeking out information, getting feedback, it may not be the Western form of participation, but it is a form of participation. So I don't apologize for that. The third one about the rising apartment, the rising maybe commercial prices and rising apartment prices. Personally, I feel that it's only a temporary problem. I think there is a slight imbalance between supply and demand, both in HDB and also in private sector. And the problem will be solved. You read in the newspaper, there have been already measures to tackle this problem, and I'm fully confident that within the next 3 years, this will be an issue of the past. It's not a permanent issue. And the recent concern of an HDB shop being sold for over, I don't know how many $1 million, does it mean that it's going to price HDB shopping center out of the affordability? I personally feel that, first of all, as I mentioned earlier, the government does respect the working of market value. You do not artificially regulate market value. So this kind of phenomenon must be accepted. But personally, I feel that there is a supply and demand issue. If this particular shop prices itself out of the range of affordability of HDB residents, the market will correct itself. I'm confident of that.
Yes, quickly. What I have to
I think, yeah, I just want to add about the resource question. One of the really interesting thing is that very early in the PAP government, there was a decision to use whatever money that we have, mostly on social policy. And so a lot of money was spent on housing and education. The other interesting thing about housing, public housing financing is that the sales of public housing was very important because it allows the HDB and the government to recover the cost of construction at a much higher rate. If you look at socialist countries that insist on building rental housing, they ran out of money after 2 cycles of construction. And so the quality of housing keeps deteriorating.
Thank you very much. You know, there are very many more questions and comments that are possible, but we really have to end this very interesting session because we have another interesting session coming next, and that is the presentation by Dr. Tan Wee Kiat on, on imagining the garden city, which is very pleasurable and pleasant. Thank you.